But I'm going to introduce someone who's a really close friend of mine, I think. He's Associate Professor John Grigg. He's been great. He's been a big and important part of my life, giving me a little bit of vision, which is helpful to get by. And he's also been an important part of my son's life, helping with Jeremy, getting him on track and giving a little bit of vision to help him find his way through this world. What's cool about John is he's not your average ophthalmologist. He works in 3 areas, not just for clinical stuff that you may be familiar with him, but he also leads a lot of the research. In fact, there's an organisation called RENSGO, which is the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Ophthalmologists, and he's helped set the scientific agenda on I think you're chair of the science committee, right? 5 years. Yeah, for 5 years, yep. So he sets that, and he's also the head of ophthalmology at the University of Sydney. And in that capacity, he's responsible for training the future of Australia's eye surgeons. And so he's been doing that for a very long time. Quite literally though, he's actually helped write the book in ophthalmology. You can actually find it, I think. I tried looking on Amazon because I was going to buy one, but it's very difficult to find eye surgery textbooks on Amazon, turns out. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor John Grigg. Thank you.
Matt, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you for all coming today. I mean, that last session was wonderful, and I think that's part of what today's about, is sort of bringing together all the community that helps look after people with vision problems. So today I wanted to just go through a couple of things, because the audience in this section is sort of more the parents and also the teachers and vision support teachers. So I wanted to give a little overview of how we're the modern or the advances in assessing and making the diagnosis for some of these vision-causing problems that are often inherited, and then a little bit about some of the practical things, particularly about driving in particular. So that really summarizes. So we look at the advances in assessing and refining the diagnosis, because this is becoming important as new treatments are becoming available, how the new investigations will help guide prognosis and also help to with the interpretation of the genetic information that's coming forward, and then as new therapies are becoming available to help monitor those. So one of the big advances, we've got imaging systems now that can take a photograph of the entire retina inside the eye. So if you're trying to imagine what this machine does, it's like looking through a keyhole and trying to visualize what's going on all the sides of the room. And so this uses a red and green laser to sort of give you that view. So we can now sort of image and record what's going in the periphery. The traditional cameras we've had only gave that sort of view of things. So you can see how we can get a lot more information. And I thought I'd just sort of give some landmarks of what we're talking about here. If we put this next, so on the right-hand side of the screen here, we have the optic nerve, which is about 1.5 millimeters in size, contains 1.2 million nerve fibers, and that takes everything, all the information about vision to the brain. In the very centre there, the fovea, is the small spot that we read with. It's 1/3 of a millimetre in size, so it's really tiny, and everything else does your side vision. So you might have relatives who have macular degeneration as they get older. Well, you can see it doesn't take much to muck up that small little area. So there's some of the terms that we'll use as we go through and look at the new assessments. This photograph sort of contains really textbook images of the common causes of vision impairment due to retinal disorder. So conditions like retinitis pigmentosa, which is on the right-hand side here, or Stargardt's disease, or Leber's congenital amaurosis, they're conditions you may have heard of. And sometimes you can pick the diagnosis by looking at the images there. But this photo of these 6 things, all the eye images look entirely normal, yet they all have the same conditions. So we have to develop ways of trying to work out how do you determine whether this normal appearing eye actually has a retinal condition like what we saw in the first images. All of these have multiple different genetic causes, so we're trying to sort of then hone down. So one of the ways is it's really important to get the symptoms of what's going on, and part of that is when we're looking at visual function is one of the first important things to find out about, is we can divide that up here because the retina it's a film, like in a camera analogy, contains two types of light receptors called rods and cones. The rods are for our night vision and our side vision, and our cones are for our colour vision and daytime vision. And so by asking questions about those sort of factors, we can work out what part of the visual system is not working well. Although, as you'd expect, if you ask somebody, can you see at night? Certainly if you ask a child, they think you're crazy because, we can't see at night. But you need to sort of get that information by, how do you go when you go to the movies? When you walk into that dark theatre, can you find a seat? Those are sort of the questions that you'd want to find. Again, are you very light sensitive? Or do you have trouble going from outside to inside? Those things help us work out what part of the visual system is affected. It's also important to know sometimes medications can interfere with vision, sometimes the family history is critical, and then commonly the vision problems can be associated with other sorts of problems, so hearing problems or problems with your kidneys or neurological disorders. So we need to sort of put all this together when we're trying to work out the diagnosis. Then there's two broad areas of sort of how do we assess things. We can assess the function and the structure. And we really want to match those things together. So the function things are familiar with getting the visual acuity measured. Working out whether you need glasses is quite critical, and that's something that's often overlooked in managing people with poor vision, is how's your colour vision. Then we look at measuring your peripheral vision. Then we come to the electrophysiology, we'll briefly look in a moment, which looks in more detail what part of the visual system is working or not working. And then we've really had a lot of advances in analysing the structures. The imaging systems really now let us look at a microscopic level, and we'll go through these briefly in a moment. There's three I want to really look at. The advances in this thing called optical coherence tomography, which is similar to ultrasound, except it uses light. So the resolution is much, much greater. We can get down to sort of several microns to look at the eye. We can use this property of biological tissues where you shine a blue light on them and they fluoresce back at you, and so that gives us some ideas of how the retina is working. And then we can use electrophysiology, and some of you may have experienced that with your children or yourselves, how we can really dissect what part of the eye is working or not working. This is a cross-section of the retina on the top. The black and white picture is from the optical coherence tomography, or OCT. The bottom picture is a section from of a histology, so taken actually from an animal, but you can see all the banding, so we can actually get down to this histology sort of type level now to really interpret what part of the eye is being affected. This is a real advance that's only come in the last 12 months. With the OCT, we can now image the blood vessels and the capillaries around the eye. So this is a picture here. The large vessels are the vessels in the retina. We saw those on the colour photo before. All these tiny little lines between them are the capillaries, and in this technique, there's actually a couple of layers of capillaries in the retina, and we've never been able to image those before. And now with this technology, we can, and starts to give us some idea of how to look at what affects the vascular supplies. This is a picture of somebody with diabetes, and you can sort of see some little gaps that are missing, particularly up in the top right-hand corner where some of the capillaries are missing, and that's what happens in diabetes. But this is useful for all our retinal conditions, and we're just starting to understand how this will be implicated in treatments as well as diagnosis. This is a picture of the autofluorescence, where we can now look at how the health of the outer layer. So this gives us the outer layer of the retina, whether there's a problem with that, and whether that's affected in disease, or whether we can monitor conditions with that. And we find it particularly helpful for monitoring retinal disorders. And that's a simple test that goes with those other photographs. And the final thing on these investigations is that with the electrophysiology, we can actually dissect out, there's about 10 layers in the retina, and we can then dissect down to which layer is actually being involved by that. And so you can see on the right here, we can see the picture of the histology again, the OCT at the bottom, and then the three different tests that can actually test which part of the retina is affected. These are sort of the machine that we use. Part of it you have to sit in the dark for 20 minutes so we can then monitor the rod function, and then we turn the lights on and we can actually work out what part of the system is working on. And this gives us the diagnosis, but it's also going to help us with working out what the treatments are going to be as we move forward with that area. So this is just putting it all together with somebody who's got retinitis pigmentosa, which is probably the commonest of the retinal disorders that are inherited. So up on the right side here, we can see the wide field photograph, and we see the pigmentary changes come from degeneration of the retina. We see the autofluorescence pattern down the bottom here, and we can see a little ring of bright white in the centre there, and that correlates with the OCT scan on the far side, where there's one of the lines is preserved within the white circle, but beyond it, the outer layers of the retina are lost. And so we can start to sort of then use these to measure and see how well our treatments are going to be going. And the electrophysiology up the top side shows that our rod system is not working so well, but the cone system is still present. So by combining all these tools, we can then get a good picture of what that person can see and how they're functioning. And as our new treatments come, we'll be able to work out whether the treatments are working or not, or whether it's just a condition staying the same. Electrophysiology is also important because once you've made the diagnosis, people want to know, well, what is my prognosis? Am I going to go blind? And we can measure what the residual retinal function is and give people an estimate now of how long they have useful vision for. And that's very reassuring for people that it's mostly with these sort of disorders, people are going to have a long time of vision. And so this tells us, by looking at the residual function, whether they have 20, 30 or 50 years of useful vision. And that's really important, we find, for people. By visual self-sufficiency, what that means is we can do activities of daily living, so we can still dress ourselves, we can still find our food, those sort of things. We still might be registered legally blind, but we can still do a lot of the activities that maintain us with self-sufficiency in our own homes. So that's something that we can help forecast, often from the first or second consultation, doing those investigations. So there's a sort of a summary of what we've been advances, and some of you will have that when you go and see the eye specialist or the optometrist, but this is how we put it together when we're looking at people with really poor vision. The next thing is really managing poor vision, and I think it's still critical that we look at in this sort of order, that there's really have to make sure that the glasses that you're wearing are appropriate. I still see people coming to our tertiary referral centre who would have been better having a good pair of glasses, and that would have avoided the whole visit to me. But, and people who've got poor vision, we really need to make sure that's working well. It's difficult these days finding the right place to get your glasses sometimes because there's lots of different options. Unfortunately, they're often expensive. The cheaper places sometimes do a good job, sometimes don't. Then we've got the last two options with medical and therapy advances, and I'm not going to really cover those today. I wanted to get on to driving, because driving is often sort of thought as an absolute, either you can or you can't. But there's a lot of areas that are grey in between. And I wanted to go through some of the standards that are involved in this. So basically, to get an open driver's licence as a private citizen, then you need a visual acuity of 6/12 or better in one eye. And that means it's sort of really about, and that 6/12 is 2 lines up from the normal vision line of 660 or 20/20 in the old feet. So that's the central acuity line. The second criteria is that you've got a broad visual field. You need 110 degrees on the horizontal and 10 degrees above and below the horizontal. The visual field, the way of measuring that is actually using a brighter light. That if most visual field tests that people would have will be what we call a threshold field, is finding the absolute boundary of what you can see and what you can't see. And if you do that for most people who've got vision impairment, it'll look terrible. But that's not how people function every day. What this driving test does is uses a brighter light and looks at whether you can see the brighter light or not. And so it's specifically designed to sort of look at safety on driving. And so this is an example of on the right-hand side of the screen of somebody who has retinitis pigmentosa, and yet who's, in fact, the test all we saw before looks quite severe, that condition, yet their function is such that they can still function and drive a car. And so this is a test where the patient's asked to see 120 points on the computer. They get given a bright flash, can you see, can you not? And they go around. And so with that person has passed the test. There's this intermediate category which people seem to ignore, I think, is a conditional license. It's a mechanism for optimising driver and public safety, but also maintaining driver independence. And so this is for people where they've had congenital childhood conditions And so they've adapted naturally to be able to manage that and also have safe strategies to drive. These require independent assessment, and in fact you can have visual acuity up to 6/24, so half of what the open standard is, but then you want to ensure that you've got a full visual field. So there's lots of things that come into play here, but these things can enable people to drive with a restricted licence. That might be only mean you can drive in daylight hours, or you can drive within a certain number of kilometres from home, or before you take a break. So there are options here to enable this. And when teenagers are coming to get their driver's licence, I think you need an assessment, and you've also got to see whether you feel that your child is safe to drive, and because we're being mindful of the fact that you're going to sit on the passenger side for 120 hours while they're driving, so you need to sort of feel, I think it's scary enough if they're fully sighted. And another interesting area is the use of these types of telescopes, which really help people who've got macular problems and they've got a normal retina surrounding it. These are called bioptic glasses, and they're a grey area in the driving standard. So people can put these little telescopes down, and so then they can see the 6/12 vision, and because their peripheral vision is normal, they can actually pass one of those driving tests. But they do take a while to train, and they need to be properly assessed. And the driving standard had an amendment to it which came out on the 1st of August this month, sort of putting it back in because it was cancelled in the 2016 revision of the driving standard, and it's just come back in, so that this can be a possibility for people to obtain driver's licence with these particular optical aids. So, but we work quite closely with the low vision clinic at University of New South Wales and the School of Optometry, who are quite experienced with this, and they will assess the young people to see whether that will work and whether they'll then be safe to drive. So it's sort of it's a group of it's a specialised subset that really could be benefit from this. The bioptic, however, taken out of the driving situation, is also very useful in the classroom for seeing when they've got otherwise normal vision in the slides. People, just finally to end the talk, people often ask, should we be going overseas to get the latest treatments and so forth? And I just thought I'd put up the latest world rankings in ophthalmology around the world with research. And you can see actually there's two Australian universities in the top 10 for ophthalmology research in the world this year. We're quite pleased to say that Sydney's been ranked number 6 in the world and Melbourne was ranked 4. So there's a critical mass of eye researchers in Australia who are really contributing to finding solutions for vision impairment. So although rankings aren't everything, but we just put that forward that it's been a great achievement from the whole team to achieve this. And in my conclusion, I'd just like to thank all the people who've contributed to today's talk, because it is something this is our 5th year this year, and it's really, we've learned just as much as what I think the feedback shows that parents and vision impaired people learn about, in bringing together all of us to exchange ideas. So I look forward to catching up in the discussions and the afternoon tea. So thank you.